Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Fort Hare. It's a pleasure to have you here. And on this Chris Hani Memorial Seminar, where the aim really is to take a historical posture to honor one of the greatest who have lived and us with a challenging living and speaking legacy. Take this moment to really celebrate and reflect on that legacy. So I wish to welcome everyone who have taken their time to come join us as we do that. This event is directly hosted by CLEAR, the Center for Leadership Ethics in Africa. We are really honored to have you as our guests today. Without wasting much time, we want to really get to the heat of things. I'm going to invite the director, Dr. Alsobrook, to open the event for us.
Thanks, Motsamai. The program director, Motsamai Molefe, who's our senior researcher at the Center for Leadership Ethics. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here today and for attending this memorial seminar in honor of Martin Tembisile Chris Hani. The seminar is hosted by the Center for Leadership Ethics in Africa in honor of the university's most esteemed alumni. We'd especially like to thank the members of the Hani family, Temba and Cleo, who've joined us today. And also thanks to our other speakers, Evelyn Grenink and Nelisa Tona, Vuyani Boy, and Kwezi Mabasa, whom we've invited to share their thoughts about our great liberation struggle leader, MK Commander Comrade Hani. This Monday, just this Monday on the 10th of April, it was exactly 30 years since Tembisile Hani was gunned down outside his home in Boksburg, cutting short his outstanding contribution to this country as an exceptionally gifted and charismatic and disciplined and popular leader. And there's no doubt that we lost one of our greatest heroes on that day. The Center for Leadership Ethics is hosting this seminar to commemorate Hani's life and his legacy, and to reflect on his vision for a free, non-racial and democratic South Africa. What did he want for our country? By reflecting on this, we can measure how far we have come in South Africa and to consider where we've fallen short in addressing the needs of the most marginalized and disenfranchised citizens of this country. Chris Hani was a proud alumnus of this University of Fort Hare. He was an SRC leader who was actively involved in student resistance against the transfer of the university to the Department of Bantu Education. He was here when Fort Hare became Fort Hare and was transferred to the apartheid government. He led protests at Fort Hare excuse me, against the formation of a whites-only republic and against the segregation of our people. It was at Fort Hare that Hani was recruited to the underground struggle, and where he encountered Marxist historical materialism, political economy, and related socialist theories, which framed his understanding and analysis of capitalist exploitation in this country. Alongside his formal studies of Latin and English and philosophy and law and public administration, Hani's fearless, generous spirit and his selfless dedication and his restless, self-disciplined commitment to uplift the poorest of the poor still continue to inspire ordinary citizens of this country 30 years later. When he took command of the SA Communist Party, when he came back out of exile as the General Secretary, he reflected in an interview that some people have said, this is what I quote, that had I remained in the ANC, I would be amongst those who would be in the next government of this country. But you see, he says, the material improvement of the conditions of millions of poor people in this country and the workers and the rural masses, in my view, he said, a new South Africa would be meaningless if the problems of the millions of poor people were not tackled. So he sacrificed his own personal ambitions for the poorest of the poor. And he said, the perks of a new government are not really appealing to me. What is important is the continuation of the struggle. And we must accept that the struggle is still continuing. And the real problems of the country are not to do with whether one is in cabinet or a key minister or so on, but what we do for the social upliftment of the working masses of the people of our country. So with this seminar, the university hopes to inspire and to remind our university community, which has gone through a lot of trouble recently with assassinations on our own soil. We want to remind the university of the honorable values and ethical leadership that are needed to truly liberate South Africa, because the struggle is still continuing. Our speakers today will share stories about Hani's life and his hopes for our country, and about the obstacles against which Hani fought tirelessly. They'll share stories about his ideas and his life's example that may guide us through the challenges that we're experiencing. Our country is in a bad shape at the moment, and we need to think about times like this in the past where people pulled through to move this country forward, to set the country on a new path. So Comrade Hani continues to live with us so long as we continue his work. And we hope with this event to carry forward the struggle for which he sacrificed his life. So thank you very much for coming here, and we look forward to hearing from our speakers about Martin Tembisile Hani. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We have a rich program, and I want us to go through it smoothly. So I don't want to waste too much time. I want to introduce the next speaker so that we get onto it. The next speaker is Cleopatra Tunyiswani. Just a brief outline. She's a daughter of Martin Tembisile Chris Hani, his firstborn child. She now lives in Middlesdrift. She is the former CEO of Partisans MK Africa, a local heritage organization dedicated to uplifting the lives of MK veterans. We are really privileged also to learn that her daughter, Aluta, her son, thanks for that, her son, Aluta, is a student here at Forte. The platform is yours, ma'am.
Let me apologize to the few. More than 30 years uThembisile basishiya. It is painful kwakule nyanga siye sahlatyelwa umntwana ka boys ongu osikhokheleyo ekhayeni wahlatywa umntana wakhe walimala. Ibiyintlungu ke kuthi kulo nyaka abo bebeselebreyitha kuthi ibiyintlungu ekhayeni. Andikwazi ke ukuma apha kakhulu kuba no-uncle wam omele uba uthetha ngotata wam. Asinawuthetha thina ngotata wethu. Kodwa singazinto ezithe zehla esizaziyo sibone zisehla, more especially kwi-MK sibona irhuqelwa phantsi ngumZantsi Afrika wonke. Ingathi zange babonwa aba bantu sabukela some of ilantikazi MK members qeshwa zizi-securities, abanye bephila into ongazange wayibona pha ehlabathini bayakhe yakhona. Azange ndiyibone into yoba eyona nto indibuhlungu kuyo yonke le nto, kwaHani kulalwa kuphekwe amanzi, akwaziwa kowutyiwa ntoni ngomso. Ikhaya lakwaHani ongaziba yintoni kalayo. Kukho abantu ababhizi ababiza elithi comrade. I don't think they know the meaning of that name, comrade. And the truth is, uncle wam, I think, akasoze athande ndithetha ngolu hlobo. Ndithethe ndiwandimi into, andithethe ngomnyu. Naye uncle uzawujonga phantsi xa engxolisa, ndingaphenduli kodwa ndiyithethile le nto endifuna uyithetha. There is one thing that I don't understand, into yoba kulo rhulumente esithi ngowethu webhongo kungaze kube mdaka idolophu ngeli hlobo. I-Main Street zigcwale iisamente, isanti Main Street, indawo emele uba ine-shops zempahla. I-Main Street igcwale into ye-construction, zonke ezidolophu. Uzandixelela into yoba siyazi iphu kumele uba ibe ndawoni? Iitiphu zi-everywhere, ongathi kuthiwa jongani le nto yenu. Kodwa ke some of ama-cadres ethu, masingathi some, all of them, it's a pain uba ungaphela i-revolution ngolu hlobo. Kodwa aluta continue. Silapha ngoku, kodwa aluta continue. Ayipheleli apha le nto, ayiqali apha. Isaya phambili because the pain of the struggle imbi. Singena ngoku ku-digital. Ingaba abantwana baseMzantsi bazabakhona na? Okanye siza konganyelwa zezinye izizwe thina sirhuqa idyokwe? Kuba kaloku imfundo esinikileyo incinci, ayiyo lesasiyifuna. Ndingomnye wabetshisa izikolo, ayiyo le nto sasiyenza. Iphi le nto sasiyenza? Iinkokheli zabantwana ezikwezi yunivesithi zonke zibanjwe ngoobhuti babo ngeenkokheli ngotywala. Iiyunivesithi zethu zidaka siziyobisi kuzo. I know I can be killed. I don't mind. I'm ready. But the truth, yona, funeka siyithethile inyani. Ungoyiki okuthiwa uphethe uza kuthi. Ilizwe lethu liphalele.
This one we fixed it, so we're changing it.
Siyabonga kakhulu, Mom. Thanks for sharing with us your experiences and your reflections about conditions in the family and also conditions of the so-called New South Africa. Thanks for that. We hope that we can listen to learn, listen to think about the difficult ethical task of being agents of transformation. Thanks for those experiences. Without wasting time, I want to call to the front Tata Utembani. Before Ezra just a brief outline of his profile. Cousin Chris Hani. Their fathers were brothers. He lived with Chris and Gilbert Hani in Cape Town before they went into exile. He has worked for many years in local economic development and municipal management here in the Eastern Cape. And I must also add to say I've had a pleasure to be educated this day. I spent a few minutes. He is a river of knowledge, and he kept gushing me with knowledge about Africa, very, very profound. He stays in East London. I said to him, I need to learn. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, the Director of the CLEAR, Dr. Chris also Brook, fellow speakers and reflectors on the life and times and the influence of Comrade Chris. Thank you to my family as well, inside this hall and outside this hall. Thank you to our City Mpo as well for perhaps in her own way of keeping the name of Chris, Obra Chris, topical and in our mind. Too often, many of us continue to be remembered or continue to be forgotten. Due to the sheer structure, philosophy, and context of society, depending on the ruling class, you will be remembered. Depending on the size and nature of society, you will not be remembered. And thank you, Program Director Tatum Zamai, for remembering this gallant soldier, this gallant member of the family. I stand before you indeed and to take you through some of the smaller things that some of the members of the family still remember Obut Tembisile. He only became Chris after May 1963. He always continued to be Tembisile. To the audience as well, thank you for giving us an opportunity to be heard. Perhaps don't expect from me to talk about military exploits, his military exploits, or his political activity. I'll talk to who Chris was from the standpoint of the family. The structure of the Hani family issues from Hani himself. Was the person called Hani lived in the 18th century. He is a great-great-grandfather to Chris. He gave birth to 4 sons in 4 houses. Ntsontswana, Bengezi, Joni, and Mkwenko. And Chris issues out of the 3rd house, the house of Joni. The house of Joni then gives birth to our grandfather, Kaiso. And of course, Kaiso is born together with his younger brother called Milton, Nkoyana Hani. The ones you normally refer to a person, to the people, the Hani people in Stellenbosch. That is the Milton Hani wing. Then out of the 3 houses of Kaiso were born a number of kids, but most immediately there was my father from the 1st house, being the youngest in that, called Ben Hani. He's Ben Ndindi Hani. And middle 2nd house was born Gilbert Taflane Hani and Elias Hani. Now these 3 brothers, of course, of the 3rd house, there was Velapi. But these first three, were very close to each other. They went on growing up and maturing. They then joined the brother to their father, Milton. They joined Milton in Stellenbosch and continued into Cape Town. At this stage, Milton had already consumed himself in the politics of Stellenbosch, the winery, farm workers, and all these things, and therefore developed an aura around him and led the workers' struggles in Stellenbosch. Through this, then, that attracted him to the ANC and the party, the South African Communist Party, the then Communist Party of South Africa. Trying to ask him to represent a context that then makes up this a person called Chris. With Chris being born to Gilbert, in short, through Gilbert and Nomaise Hani umamncube intombi yakwaBhomani. In that, there was his elder brother, Umbuyiselo. Chris himself, unomatyala intombazana who died earlier on. Christopher Nkosana Hani. Underline this thing, Christopher Nkosana Hani. So that you begin to ask him, this Tembisile Martin Hani was never born as Chris Hani. So that's so. His name is Tembisile Martin because we were slaves. He had to have a slave name, Martin. And Chris was, as a young herder, where you now see the picture of his homestead, that in the 50s, in the early 50s, was a camp, a grazing camp, where you now see your so-called Chris Hani's home. That was a grazing camp. That's where Chris Hani used to herd the cattle of his home, of his father, and the sheep. And that part of the world is rich in cattle and sheep. Even my grandfather had in the order of 1,000 sheep and the order of 500 cattle. Even if you go there, you would see how degraded the soil just on the lower slope of Kaiso Hani's place. The heavy impact of sheep. I hope some anthropologists and archaeologists would, and geneticists would find time to go and study perhaps that kind of wisdom. Then Chris was very brave, very strong-headed. And to the extent that one stage, a friend of his elder brother, they were heading some stock in the West. He had managed to hunt and find this nice meal of a bird. On dividing, this friend of his elder brother wanted to divide. He insisted on dividing Wasim. You know how Xhosa young Wasim divide a bird meat, the mfuba, the mlenze, and so on. This guy wanted to have a greater share, and that sparked a war. And when Chris was upon him, his brother said, "Hey, chief, you're going to be embarrassed. Don't dare offend this guy. Let's do something else." So at that age, around age 10, he already was beginning to show his ability to stand and defend what he regards as his own. At home, he had Indlezana, I don't know what English Indlezana could be, very hospitable, loving mother, Umamncube, Unomaise, very loving, very protective of his kids. And then teaching Chris how to cook. And Chris can cook. I've enjoyed his cooking. And so the environment was an environment that creates a human being, a person that loves people. Already from that stage, there were some bases, some foundation that creates a person, a person of humanity. And then, fast forward, he passes primary school, Kwatkopoza in Lower Sabalele. He goes to Zigudu. In Zigudu, he stays with her aunt, younger sister, to her mother, and would come during weekends. He was not traveling to and from every day. I just want to correct that narrative. She was staying with the Zeze family, to which her aunt was married. So let's correct this narrative. I'm going to correct yet another. It was a mistake in Cape Town. Now, Chris, as young men at the time, Chris had this, was him and his brother, this fashion of going to see his father in Cape Town. And remember Chris skipped some few classes. Very brilliant fellow. That's why he entered university early, at the age of 17, approximately. Very brilliant fellow. So here is Chris already understanding how South Africa is run and is nurtured. How does this happen? At this stage, Sir Peter was showing my briefcase here. I've got a case, a Supreme Court case letter, a Supreme Court case of my father. Now, what you call the Natives Urban Areas Consolidation Act of 1945. I wish students of history, students of knowledge could perhaps go read what Section 10 of that act says, because it has affected each and every of you sitting in this room. It has affected your life. You'll understand how the development of your family, if ever anybody had to go to an urban area, has been affected. Go read that section. Yes, you could read the Calabar Act, could read, but understand Section 10. And you will notice that earlier people spoke about Ndakunika or Section 10, which means I will expel you. I will render you stateless. So, so understand the import of that person, because it's important. It has designed the life as you now see it. Chris, then on coming to Cape Town, he had this leisurely, because our fathers were expelled, we're not being given peddler's license. If you look at that time, you won't find a trader. Nobody black called a trader in that act. They talk about a peddler. They couldn't get peddler's license from Stuart Alexander Rodas, the township manager of Langa Township. So they couldn't trade in Cape Town, anywhere in Cape Town. They could only trade in Stellenbosch under the auspices of their uncle, Milton, because he had already set the scene and therefore was able to maneuver and defeat the Wasim. It's very funny, under a tight environment like a Stellenbosch, pre-1994. Because of the level of organization and the nature of his leadership. So the three brothers then found that it was easier to stay and trade in Stellenbosch during weekends. And so did their kids. We found, now when I grew up in Cape Town, I had the opportunity of going to Stellenbosch. It was nice, the kid, you running around. But the three brothers and their uncle used to discuss heavy politics. It is during these sessions that Chris was noted by Milton and got attracted to politics. It was Milton that groomed him. And it was his father that took him further. That's the initial part. I know that people, because they don't know the inner workings of the family, they would refer to the influence from outside. It started from inside, through Milton, our grandfather, and Gilbert. And so, these fellows related in that fashion. So Stellenbosch became the hub, if you like, of the Hani family. Particularly from 1955. It's just a pity that I would watch him. I went to watch him. I went to the National Archives in Cape Town to pull out this document. I've got it here. And then, here is a young Chris beginning to understand the world slightly differently than the others. And a brilliant Chris at that. So he started now being absorbed in politics. By the time he went to university, Chris was already fully active. And indeed, he was also active with other people, and later on, the likes of Archie Sibeko, to name but a few. Fast forward to 1960, the ANC gets banned. Our fathers get banned, they get banned in 1961. In some records, it is said that they were banned in 1962. Please erase that 2 and put 1. October 1961. Because in the same vein, the same document would say Gilbert Hani left in May 1962. Does it make sense? Why I know this? It is because Chris's father instructed my father. My father was a bit on the hyperactive like Chris. He liked lawyers. He wanted me to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, I disappointed him. So my father took the order of going to lawyers to appeal the 1961 October banishment orders. And so the case was deferred to 1962, April 1962. And they lost the case. This gave, remember, Chris's father, unknown to many people, was a member of the Mandela Plan, the M Plan. He was a giant in his own state. As the member of the M Plan, he had some duties to do outside the country, beyond the banning orders. So a plan had to be hatched to whisk him out of the country. What was that plan? The plan broadly was to station him outside South Africa to receive those people who were leaving South Africa on exile towards him. And along the way, they would get some fund from him towards him. So he would operate an entity outside the country, generate and have and share it with those that were escaping South Africa. So what happened? On the eve of him being deported in May, Chris was instructed by the movement so that there's no attraction, no external person that is seen around Gilbert. It becomes a normal thing. So he was instructed by the Wasim to execute the plan. The plan was, he met with his father, Gilbert, that Gilbert, please, Tata, what are you going to do? No, I'm not too sure. So here's the plan. You take a briefcase, just wear just your ordinary Wasim, jacket and Wasim, and take your briefcase, because you are normally seen with your briefcase anyway. Put just your one underwear and put an underwear and perhaps a shirt. And please call Tatum Pemba and tell him of the plan. All you need to do, this evening, you go straight to Sea Point. Take a bus from Holanga to Mowbray, from Mowbray to the city center, from the city center to Sea Point, and you must disembark at bus halt number 18. And The old man did that. He disembarked at bus halt number 18, and as he was just together with Mr. Mpamba, and he was, Mpemba, and he was just wondering why, he saw Chris and a certain white colleague of Chris. They crossed the road and entered that yard. The wooden, in there was a van with two wooden boxes in which they were put in. Slam bang, leaving Cape Town, driving throughout the night to Bloemfontein, filling petrol in Bloemfontein, going for the Lesotho borders. Entered Lesotho, and there they were dropped, and this guy's job was done, so he left back. Within a minute, they have disembarked. There were two gentlemen who were receiving them into Lesotho. The level of organization, the level of machination, the ability to think that plan through, that's Chris at his best. I'm trying to ask him to debunk some of these notions. And these stories they have been relayed to me by Chris's father because we were so close. We were so close in that I was interested in his very interesting ways of vanishing. Whenever he addresses masses at North Barracks around Langa, I will be told that he simply vanished among the masses. I couldn't understand. And he would evade, there was the police, and be in Southern Barracks. And he would address masses about Matanzima, about Dompas, about land dispossessions, about worker struggles. And then the police would come. He would vanish among the people. So, hearing this about him, I said, Tatomkhulu, no, this is interesting. Are you a magician? At first he was lost. I said, what do you mean trying? I said, but Tatomkhulu, how do you disappear among people? I said, yes, I disappear. And remember, I was about the age of 6 years at the time, 6, 7 years at the time. He said, I said, Tatomkhulu, you must teach me this. Yes. He said, yes, Mchonyana, I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you. And in later years then, when we were later on taken from Cape Town, after being squatters from one point to another between 1963 to 68, he continued communicating with us until he came from exile. But then, what then happened to Chris? Chris went to us in the station where these other guys who were banished from Cape Town were being deported via a train, boom, back to whatever homeland they belonged to. Right? And the police were hard up looking for Gilbert Hani. They finally found, they said, here is one of his sons. And he asked, what's the problem? Where's your father? He should be getting to the train. He said, hey, you missed him. He should be, he called, he sent a message that he has arrived in Gaborone. He gave a decoy. He said, no, my father. Oh, no, that guy. He sent the message through, he has arrived safely in Gaborone. That's Chris. Now, this May 1963, Chris, remember, was having a case of suppression of communism, what have you. He should be appearing in court, was he? So he missed my mother at the last bus halt in Langa, as on Bunga Avenue, before you climb the bridge to join N2. And so he was just moralizing to my mother. And my mother was asking, this young man, what's happening to him? Auntie, you must keep the children, you must, South Africa is going to be different, and all this thing. Hey, my mother was confused, but she kept on talking. And he kept on crossing the street and coming back about 3 times. He would stride across the street and come back. And then sooner came the bus. She thought that she was boarding the bus with him. And immediately after the bus was a black car. And as she was alighting on the Wasim, Chris was alighting, embarking on the black car, which overtook the Wasim bus and joined the freeway on your Wasim Eastern Expressway on N2. Because she was the last person to see Chris, she bore the brunt. She bore the brunt, ending with us being deported to Timbasa in 1968. Now, so that's the last time I saw Chris. Fast forward to, and you know, what was beautiful with Chris? It's nice that, you know, he always prepare food. Among the food I still like today. My wife cooks it whenever it's hot. It's umpogo. Put it with amasi, I'm good to go. You are my friend. So, Chris, as a good cook, did this thing, nice thing, to loosen my attention by cooking for me. He wouldn't prepare bread or whatever, you cook nicely. Now, fast forward to 1990, Chris comes back, we meet again. And the first thing he did when he came to the border region, then, he came to my place to honor me. And that day was the 15th of June, on the day that the border region was installing its last leadership of Seiko border region, together with Makengisi Stofile, the late, with the late Bawu Raymond Mhlaba. They graced my place. Now, fast forward, his last visit to the border region, I want to end. His last visit to the border region was around, I think, the last week of March. We came here at Fort Hare, where this big hall, what you call, where people graduate. Yeah, we were there. Then after interacting with students, and so on, delivering speech and answers questions, then we went to what was this? What is now Woos in Butterworth? What was it earlier on? Tech, what? Eh? No, it was tech something. It was a technicon. It was a technicon then those days. We went there was Wolomisa. So we went to Mtata, sleep in Mtata, and then from Mtata, after some we then went to Heu side, that side of Queenstown, and we came back to Alice, Kwezana area, for him to interact with certain families whose kids hadn't come back. So whenever he would be coming to any place, and there were some soldiers who did not come back, he would visit families in that vicinity to go talk to the parents and so on. That was one other was he cared. He knew his all the plus minus 25,000 soldiers. He knew them by first name. He knew them, their combat name, their actual name. He knew them where they came. He knew them how they got into exile. He had that memory. A powerful computer, which is a digital was him. He had a fourth industrial revolution brain. And so that was, then fast forward later in that evening, after 3 or 4 days of going around the border, we were sitting somewhere in King Williamstown. There was something that was happening in my life. Tragic question. So I had to answer to him because how he had it was differently. So after talking to him, he said, look, in life, Chonyane, there are certain fundamentals. One, understand that if you boarded a train from East London down station with so many people, you won't get with the same people to Alice. Some would disembark along the way, and some would climb in along the way. That's what he said to me that evening. Then, when we were talking about, and I was stubborn on something and relating with other people, I told myself, I can't relate with these people. I'm sorry, I'm done. He said to me, look, Chonyan, there's one thing you must understand. A hyena stinks, and stinks absolutely. And then he said, but when you cross this broad Zambezi River to come into Zimbabwe, you're the best animal to cross that broad Zambezi River is a stinking hyena. The crocodiles won't do you nothing. But if you cross alone, you'll be a feast of the crocodiles. But if you cross with a hyena, you are bound to be safe. That is said 30 years ago, and it still sticks. That's why at age 67, I'm still standing. But what we draw from Chris, from the life of Chris, as a family, we draw strength. He confirms the strength of our genetic material as a family. That's being objective, rather that's being subjective. He confirms that there was the genetic strain of that mother who was a crossbreed, the earlier crossbreed of the 18th century, which we carry, by the way. He gives us that memory, that genetic code. That's number one. Number two, his life instructs us to be humble and not make noise. And many people have not known me for a long time. I'm known by my peers. He preaches love, but he preaches bravery. He preaches boundaries. There are certain boundaries which you cannot cross in life. There are certain boundaries which you must cross in life. Broadly, at the level of content, Chris's life is about land, access to land. Access to land, which is linked to his Triple H campaign. Some of you might have, perhaps could be remembering the program he ran as the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party in earlier days. Hunger, health, and housing, the Triple H campaign. That's the campaign he once ran. And he showed commitment to South Africa. He was honest and true to every member of South Africa. Then, I must then thank the South African Communist Party for entrusting him with the leadership position. Thank the South African society for keeping him in his mind. Thank you for actually making this possible. But it won't be complete, if I may ask myself a question. I'm not asking you. What is difficult with the South African society, particularly the agency called the South African government, of naming one of the annual presidential awards by the name of Thembisile Martin Chris? What's difficult? Does it take 50 years to think about it? Is it an abominable idea? What is difficult? Of course, let's put that aside. What then is difficult in awarding Chris for his contribution to South African society posthumously? You won't see him. If you are afraid of him or you won't see him, you'll be awarding it posthumously. What perhaps is difficult? I'm just asking myself. Lastly, what is difficult with the South African universities outside the verkramte conservative universities? What's difficult in having a scholarship in his name? Because he was a scholar in his own right. He was an intellectual in his own right. Is it anti-scholarship towards him to name something in his name? Is it difficult? Is it painful? Is it a disaster to do so? Those are some of the things. Besides that, thank you to the organizers. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mr. Mutsamai. Thanks to those guys who sat around the table and made a decision and the concept of this nature to remember Chris. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to South Africans as well for the love of Chris. Thanks.
Siyabulela kakhulu tata. Siyabulela kakhulu. I think one of the biggest challenges that I think we need to think about, which today I'm finding answers to. I was doing a course at the West Business School, still a young boy then. And then it was a small class. In that class, a few black people, and then the course was about human resource development. And the course was challenging us to think about ourselves as resources. And this fellow says, before you can understand yourself as a resource, you must be able to historically locate yourself. And then the guy says, go back to your table and map out the tree of your history and locate yourself historically. I was shocked that some of my white colleagues in that particular course could go up to the 10th century, identify themselves as far back as Scotland, their great-great-grandfather. That's historical locatedness. But one thing that struck me as a boy that grew up in Soweto, that I couldn't locate myself beyond Soweto. And I thought, and that for me really challenged me. So thanks a lot about how you really, going to the 18th century and really locating a person's history, and giving a sense of their history and locating them sociologically to understand people also as a product, not only of a particular history, but also of a particular sociological makeup and how ideas really impact people. So thanks for that rich historical location of the life of Babu Hani and his contribution to our country. Thanks a lot for that. And the question that you posed at the end, I think it's a question that really we must think seriously about it. That if he was really an intellectual who has such a huge impact in our lives, would it really hurt us as a country to think of a scholarship, a bursary dedicated to his name, to really promote that intellectual commitment that he had? I think this is a question that a lot of us will start thinking seriously about. Even if it's you with your little research money as an academic, you say, I have a bursary for one student, and you see what I mean? So thanks a lot for that. Really, thanks a lot for that. We are moving on very well. We want to proceed with our program. Without wasting time, we want to call Unelisa Tona. He's an honors student, to come share with us their academic interests as they relate to the legacy of Chris Hani. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. This year marks 30 years since the assassination of one of the South Africa's greatest leaders of the anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa, Chris Hani. Chris Hani was the former leader of the South African Communist Party and the chief of staff of the armed wing of the African National Congress, Umkhonto weSizwe. 30 years after his murder, Hani remains widely popular amongst South Africans, especially Black South Africans. The more they feel a sense of betrayal, the more his mythical status flourishes in their mind. Modern South Africa is far from the kind of society that Hani and the other stalwarts of liberation envisioned. It is at odds with what he spoke and wrote about. And I dare say, if he were alive today, he would be thoroughly disgusted with what his former political homes, the ANC and the SACP, have become. However, to do justice to the man's memory, it is important to go back a few decades back and briefly chart his rise to the apex of the South African politics. Chris Hani was born on the 28th of November 1942 in the rural areas of Cofimvaba in a village called Isabalele. The pro-apartheid National Party came into power only a few years later, in 1948, and enforced racial segregation, discrimination against the 9 white populations, and forced resettlement on blacks into the so-called Bantustan republics conceived along tribal lines. Hani's experience of growing up under the apartheid, witnessing the injustices inflicted upon Black South Africans, shaped his views and led to the anti-apartheid struggle. He joined the mainstream politics at the age of 15, when he became a card-carrying member of the ANC Youth League. Like many black leaders of his time, he studied at the University of Fort Hare, one of the few universities that accepted black South African students during the apartheid era. And he was deeply involved in student activities. In 1961, he joined the South African Communist Party, which operated underground due to being banned in the 1950s. When Hani graduated in 40, he went to join his father, to join his father Gilbert in Cape Town, where he worked as an articled clerk at a law firm. And later he was recruited to join the Western Cape, the ANC's Western Cape Regional Committee, known as the Committee of Seven, which saw him being, which his involvement in the Committee of Seven led to his first arrest in 1963. As he was arrested for carrying pamphlets attacking the government, 90-day detention, and he was charged under the Suppression of the Communism Act of 1950. He later became a leader of Umkhonto Wesizwe, an ANC military wing which was founded after black leaders concluded that the apartheid system could not be brought down by civil disobedience alone. They would bring it down by any means necessary, including armed resistance, involving acts of sabotage against key infrastructure such as power stations and power lines and factories. He grew up in a society where black South Africans were not regarded as equal citizens. He believed strongly in the need for armed struggle against the apartheid government and was a strategist in planning and carrying out guerrilla attacks against the regime. For this reason, the apartheid government developed a particular hatred for him and placed a target on his back. Yet, Hani was fearless. Even though he fought against the apartheid system, he steeped himself in the revolutionary ideology that he shared with his comrade. A comrade Chris Hani was a non-racialist, a committed Marxist, and a vocal advocate for democracy. He believed that the struggle against apartheid was not only against racism, but also a fight for economic and social justice. He was critical of the neoliberal economic policies of the post-apartheid government and called for the nationalization of key industries and redistribution of wealth. And he was the man of people. He knew how to interact with the crowd and deliver long speeches in which he easily explained matters of policy to cheering supporters and sympathizers. The fact that he often appeared in military fatigues was a symbol to show that he was a committed fighter for social and economic rights. In 1969, Hani and six of his comrades delivered a landmark memorandum to the historic leadership in Lusaka, in which resulted in the calling of an urgent conference, which was held at Morocco in Tanzania on the 25th of April 1969. I shall quote some of the key issues that were raised in the memorandum. The quote goes, "We are disturbed by the careerism of ANC leadership abroad, and we have, in every sense, become professional politicians rather than professional revolutionaries. We have been forced to draw the conclusion that the payment of salaries of people working in offices is very detrimental to the revolutionary outlook, and those who receive such monies. It is without a doubt that such payment corrupt cadres at any level, and have an effect of making people perform their duties or ill offices because of money inducement rather than dedication to the struggle to become in effect merely salarized employees in the movement. It is high time that all members and cadres of the ANC, be they in MK or not, should receive equal treatment and be judged only on the basis of their dedication and sacrifice to the cause. Although Comrade Hani and his companions did not know at that time, they had identified a route that would one day affect most of his part. The courage to say unpopular things envisaged his commitment to true revolution in South Africa. He once famously stated during an interview, "What I fear most is that the liberators emerge as illicits who drive around Mercedes-Benz and use the resources of this country to live in palaces and to gather riches." He went on to explain that socialism is not about big concepts and heavy theories. Socialism is about decent shelter for those who are homeless. It is about water for those who have no safe drinking water. It is about healthcare. It is about a life of dignity for the old. It is about overcoming a huge divide between urban and rural areas. It is about a decent education for all our people. 29 years have passed on since the historic elections of April 1994 in South Africa that brought the ANC into power. Therefore, it is safe to say that although black South Africans are in a better place than they were during the apartheid system, they continue to harvest the grapes of wrath from a neoliberal system in which corruption and trickle-down economics continue to trap the overwhelming majority of the people in poverty. Looking at the South African Communist Party and the ANC today, they had not reflected Hani's dream of socialist revolution, ensuring equal opportunity and resources for all. There is almost a sense that, as one politician once famously put it, we did not struggle to be poor. The political class has seemingly merged with the private capitalist class, mopping into the political entrepreneurship and political entrepreneurs who seek to have the biggest houses and the biggest cars in the suburb. They are not in touch with realities on the ground, or the material conditions in which affect most South Africans. The majority of black South Africans continue to receive second-class education, second-class jobs, second-class living conditions. The South African leadership, however, appears more concerned with preserving the capitalist status quo than fighting for socialism. South Africa currently faces a number of challenges. Unemployment currently stands at 34% and youth unemployment hovering around 69%. The health system has collapsed, sucked dry by so-called tenderpreneurs who use insider connections to secure generous contract from the state. The government has failed to implement its promised national health insurance scheme, forcing many South Africans to purchase supplementary insurance from private sector. Yet it has been reported that 90% of the South African are unable to afford these such insurances. While the ANC has built over 1 million houses for the poor, many of them are of low quality, as the case in the Free State, where low income houses were built with materials containing asbestos were proved. The former Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, is currently out on bail, being linked to the asbestos contract while he was the Premier of the state. This case and others shows how South African politicians work hand in hand with business people to swing money from the state. The South African Communist Party remains a key part of the tripartite alliance that has governed South Africa since 1994. The party remained closely a close ally of the ANC during the catastrophic state capture era under President Jacob Zuma, for which it was rewarded with the ministerial post. None of the South African Communist Party leaders resigned, even though irrefutable evidence that Zuma's cabinets were collapsing the economy. The South African Communist Party fails to hold the ANC accountable as its allies, as its alliance partner on some of the things happening in South Africa today, including most recently the Phala saga, when millions of the US dollars were stolen from the President Cyril Ramaphosa's farm in Limpopo. No one knows if this money comes from an illicit financial flow, while the SACP sees no wrongdoings, no any problem with a president with a sitting president keeping so much money in his house. South Africa faces many challenges, such as land distribution, unemployment, gender-based violence, rampant poverty, climate change, and crime. Land, in particular, remains a continuous issue, as South Africa is still firmly in the hands of a small minority, those who controls the means of production. Yet the ANC continues to come up with policies around land, but the South African Communist Party fails to put pressure on its coalition ally when it comes to parliamentary legislation around the accelerated land reforms. I thank you.
Thanks a lot. Mr. Nelisa Tona is a history honors student. He's conducting his research on Chris Hani. For his dissertation, he's focusing on Chris Hani. You can see there's a lot of material he wants to share with us. It's just the limitations of time. But we hope that the dissertation will be made available to us in future to benefit from that. Thanks a lot for that. At 3 o'clock, we've got load shedding, but we have a generator that's going to kick in 2 minutes. We left with three speakers. We're celebrating a person with a giant character. So we need to be patient as we cut it slowly but surely to really get the little fragments we could learn from and enjoy from this life that was shared and lived in this country of our South Africa. Next in our program, we're going to invite Evelyn Klinik, investigative journalist, started a career in Amsterdam in the 80s. She has really done a lot of work. Interest in South Africa in particular was sparked by an assassination that happened in Paris of one individual who was leading the anti-apartheid struggle. She was just surprised. Why would, in a context where there is support for anti-apartheid, would someone be killed? Her interest, that's where it was sparked. She has continued to collaborate with people in Africa, and her work has continued to do serious work in investigative journalism. She has authored 3 books, at least my records show 3 books that she has authored. And Incorruptible is translated in English, her latest book, only in English. Yeah, the other 2 books were in Dutch, right? Yeah, Incorruptible in English, so it's accessible. And we're going to give the platform to her now. Thank you. Let's 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be out of here when the lights go out. As I was after researching the murder of Dulcie September in Paris, I was told by comrades here in South Africa that, okay, but Chris Hani too. And I was surprised because, I was only aware of the official narrative of Janusz Walus and Clive Darby-Lewis, whereas with the Dulcie September case, there was arms trade and corruption. But the comrades were telling me, no, same thing. So that sparked my interest. And as I was researching his murder, one word kept coming up from sources who had known the times of 1991, 1992, where Chris Hani was among those comrades preparing to build a new society. And that word was incorruptible. Chris Hani was killed because he was incorruptible. And I knew Chris Hani a little bit before he was murdered. So I thought a lot about what does it mean when they say he's incorruptible? Does it mean you're a nice guy? Does it mean you're a saint? Does it mean you never succumb to any temptation? I knew that wasn't true because I was traveling with a few other comrades in 1990 in Kobo, and I hope I did the click right. And Chris Hani was there, staying at Holomisa's palace at the time, and they were just behaving like teenage boys. They were so happy and free and shooting beer cans on the side of the road. So this was not a choir boy or somebody who only thought about duty and only about being serious and lecturing people all the time. I didn't see a saint, but what did I see? I saw that people loved him. I saw teenagers around Kofi Mwaba and Nkobo, they had made little guns from wood, and they were so proud with their little guns because it made them look like Chris Hani. And I thought that's also not it. Somebody that is a celebrity to you and that's brave, and he's been fighting Amabuno, okay, that's all fine. And now you have your little gun as well, so you identify with him, that's also very fine. These people would be 45 years old now. I don't know if there's any of them here. But that was not being incorruptible. That was just being hopeful and enthusiastic, which are also great things to be. But where is that incorruptible? I think I saw a glimpse of it when I met him again at the time of the first ANC conference in Freedom in Durban, Westville, 1991. He was standing in front of one of the tents on the grounds, and he was just standing there. I don't know, no Gucci, no special shoes, no. And I was a lot younger then, and I wanted an interview, and I knew he had forgotten me because, that was 2 years ago, and I was just there as part of a crowd. So I walk up to him and say, Comrade Chris, let's do this, let's do an interview. And I met my most charming, and I met my most smiley. And I was halfway expecting that, that would work. And I said, no, they told me to stand here. So I'm standing here. And later on, it dawned on me when I heard these stories about him being incorruptible that it probably means something like being your own person, having your own moral compass, having your own agenda, having your own program. They can drive by with the most beautiful girls in the biggest Ferraris. That's not what you're doing. You're doing the thing that you committed to, which was to be standing there. In that case, he was waiting for a workshop or a meeting or some important thing to happen. And he was not impressed, he was not swayed. It wasn't any outside enemy, a white person as I am, or an outside diversion as I could also be maybe. That was all not important. What was important was what he found important to do for himself at that point in time. It's a small anecdote, but I think it says a lot, because if you have that core, and I'm thinking back to what Themba said about having a core of humanity, growing up in your family, in your society, knowing what your place is, what your duty is, how you relate to other human beings. The socialist views come much after that. You can even have, I always think, you even could have right-wing views and still be sort of your own person, but that's a discussion for later maybe. It reminded me also of what Nelson Mandela wrote in his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, and that poem that he likes. I am the captain of my soul. Of course you can be hurt and you can be angry and you can feel like eating a whole tin of cookies. You're not a saint, but you are the captain of your soul. And that is to me what Chris Hani was, and to me in my investigation, I think that is why he was killed. Because if you're not just a rudderless boat that goes here because an enemy is threatening you, so you go away, or you go there because somebody's tempting you, you go that way, then powers cannot do with you what they want. And at the time when Chris Hani was murdered, what was happening? There were a lot of outside influences. There were French businessmen who were trying to make friends with his family, with his wife, offering them jobs, offering them furniture. And Chris stayed away from them. I didn't interview the rest of the family about that, so I don't know. Maybe they were all like Chris probably, but I know that Chris didn't have time for them. Then there was wining and dining of the entire MK top, because this was now the time that the arms deal was being prepared. And there were all these big businessmen with lots of money and cars and parties and girls and drink and whatnot, and they were having the time of their lives. MK comrades told me that was going on. And Chris Hani was not part of that. At the time in 1992, representatives of British Aerospace were very close to people. And I'm not saying that therefore the people they were close to were corrupt. I'm not accusing anybody of any crime. I'm saying those would be the kind of people who would say, hey, fun, party. Hey, I'm being complimented because I have a good suit on. Or that there's a few beautiful girls who might all want to go out with me if I take that money, which is not corruption because somebody is just my friend and wants to support me. It's all not a crime, but it means you don't have your own compass, you don't have your own place in history. I'm thinking of what Motsamai said. You don't have your idea of this is where I come from, this is where I'm going. You only know yourself, and there is a universe full of influences, and you go this, that way, and the other. And in the end, you'll go where maybe somebody will see you as the big guy with your big car and your big house and your big position. Chris Hani was the total opposite of that. it was so, and I saw it again in 1992 when this was now the time of the AIDS epidemic. And lots of people were frantic because if you talk about outside influences that sway you, the AIDS epidemic was a big example of that. There's this deadly demonic thing that can kill you, that is killing people by the tens of thousands. What do? Well, if you don't have that very strong core, you'll go look for somebody to blame, like the CIA made it in a lab. We must make a lot of speeches against the CIA. Well, maybe they did, but does it help? Or maybe you want to deny it because it's just such a big threat, it's such a terrible thing that you can't sleep, so you have to say, like some of us were saying at the time, let's not think this is real. This is, people are just hungry, you know? There is no such thing as AIDS. Or you go for a silver bullet, like people would have their magic potions, their beetroot, whatever. All things that have nothing to do with what you are and what you can do and what you can do for your community. And the one who told the truth in 1992 was Chris Hani. I want to read this. Everybody knows the Mercedes-Benz quote, but he also said this: "The AIDS epidemic in our country, unattended, will result in untold damage and suffering by the end of the century. We cannot afford to allow it to ruin the realization of our dreams." Look at how he's phrasing it. We cannot afford to allow it. We have power. Even though this is a terrible, terrible epidemic, and I'm not a doctor, but I still have power. I must confront this thing by myself, without blaming, without thinking up some magic potion. I can organize my community to be careful. I can find things to distribute to help my community. That was Chris Hani, and it made him reject so many corruptive influences because these things were not important to him. They simply were not. He could do without the furniture, he could do without the big house, he could do without the flashy cars and the adoring people. It meant nothing to him because he was the captain of his own soul. And the humanity thing and the history thing and the family and the society thing, as I found, is all linked into that. It's also the leaders of Mandela's generation who had that. And I think the people who grew up without that family, that community, that sense of sharing a common humanity, maybe it's those generations that came after when families were ripped apart, when your land was no more your lands, you didn't know where you come from. And I think that has damaged generations of people. And maybe the struggle now is to retake that feeling of being the captain of your soul. I saw in the plane this morning a few people young men that I thought were part of an ANC branch because they used words like membership and following and unanimous and, of course, comrade. And they were being so awful. They were just blocking, the business class. They were traveling business class. Blocking the passage, busy with their phones and their computers and not allowing anybody, just not allowing. It was not seeing anybody else. They were there, they were being the important guys. And I thought, if Chris Hani could see you. And it's what got him killed, but it's also what made him a hero. And I think we can all only aspire to being, all of us, again, the captains of our souls.
Thanks, Evelyn. One of the things I try to do is moral philosophy, ethics. And this, as she was talking, there's this idea of authenticity, the idea of being authenticity. But there's another idea as well that this is used, the idea of integrity. The idea of integrity. But in the historical sense of the sense that where you have a character that cannot break, right? So the idea of authentic, the idea of being true to yourself, the idea then of integrity is that idea that you don't allow circumstances to break you, right? So but there's the idea of wholesomeness as well. The idea of wholesomeness. The idea of wholesomeness. And I think beautiful ways to think of a person's life. But also as you were talking, there's something that really struck me. That sometimes when we reflect on our heroes, we lack empathy. What we do, we run to them at the point where they were victorious. We never imagine them as tempted. It's not that they didn't want these good things, but they made an ethical choice. It is that level of empathy that we appreciate the richness of their character. It was not something automatic. It was not something instinctive. They had to make a choice in the presence of all the pressures and temptations. You come from exile. You want these beautiful things. You want a big house. You want all of these things. But you also remember why I went to exile. And then you make that choice. And the ethical choices we make, they're not always nice, but we stick with them. And I think when we think of people's lives in that empathetic way, understanding that journey, not just the end result of what we see as incorruptible, I think it really poses a challenge to ourselves. Really poses a challenge to ourselves. Another way I've thought about this question is to say, often we hate people who oppress us. But one of the questions we've never thought about, had we been in a different position, wouldn't we ourselves be oppressors? And many of us are not oppressors because of circumstance, not because of choice. And so when you read then a life of a person who is a hero in that way, you realize they made a choice, even when they were in a position to be an elite, to be in a position to benefit their families. They made a difficult choice to fight for the wealth that they want to create. Thanks for that. I thought that was very profound. Thanks a lot for that. So in a few minutes, we're going to have load shedding. So maybe what we should do, we could just take a 5 minutes break, and then we'll start again at 3:05. And then we're left with 2 speakers. By 3:30, we're going to be done. Thanks. Let's just take a small break. uh, very, very empowering, really challenging also to us personally. But we're going to proceed now. We have two last speakers. We want to give them a chance, and then we'll take it from there. The next speaker is going to be Mr. Vuyani Boy. He's a CEO of the Nelson Mandela Museum at Mthatha. He's a trade union activist. He's a former curator of the Liberation Struggle Archives. He received his PhD from the University of Fort Hare in Library and Information Sciences in 21. And his research interest and focus was on the use of art. Dr. Boy to take the podium to share with us his insights.
Mandibulise emathonyaneni udikiza usawu umthuzimele abantu bensimbi emhlophe ndiphinde ke extend my greetings to Prof, my academic promoter, and to my colleagues here at University of Fort Hare, my former colleagues, and to the guests coming from far away, the students, staff members, workers at Fort Hare, and the security officers, the leadership of the SRC that I see here. Molweni Maqabane. I just want to apologize for coming very late. I was under the control and guidance of the forces of universe. But I'm glad that at least I have made it. I am here today. My presentation, in fact, I should say it, that this invitation came to me almost 2 months ago, that there's going to be this engagement. And I accepted the challenge that I will have to come and make my input. And for one reason, I've been managing the archives for a period of 18 years, the Liberation Archives that are here. Myself together, kunye no Mama U, Prof, Nkosikazi ka Prof, we put up this exhibition. That was in 1916, am I right? Yeah, 2016, yeah. We were preparing for the centenary. Perhaps I must tell you about the title of my paper. Colleagues and my professional colleagues, I tried to borrow the title of my paper from an article which was written on the 2nd April 2023 by Mr. Mabandla, that I think is associated with Mr. Alive. So that is where we will get each other. And that is where you must wait for me down there after I have made my remarks. Without any delays, colleagues, I would want to start by saying I have since identified that there is a deliberate and well-orchestrated tendency to obliterate the values and legacy of Chris Hani. I argue that the name of Chris Hani, that used to be a household name, is no longer celebrated by the government nor by the democratic organs of civil society. A name that used to be a moral compass to guide the South African and to build the fragmented South African nation is systematically obliterated by his own comrades and party. Today, the values of Chris Hani have diminished, and his integrity as a revolutionary, freedom fighter, and a liberator is put under serious scrutiny and crucifixion. There is a selective memory about his commitment to the objectives of the National Democratic Revolution. I argue that this is a systematic and deliberate and intentional national amnesia that is serving the selfish interests of certain individuals. Who are those individuals? These are the individuals that Thabo Mbeki once referred to them as imigodoi. The name of Chris Hani and his quest for total liberation of African people has become a fairy tale to the generation of today. I argue that Hani was double assassinated. One, as a human being, and secondly, Chris Hani as an idea. He was assassinated as a living human being by Yalus, and further assassinated by his own revolutionary comrades as that particular revolutionary idea that inspired a democratic order and social justice. I argue that the death of Chris Hani as a person brought about painful experiences to people of South Africa, in particular amongst young people. The shadow of his death is hanging over us, and any thought about Chris Hani is reminding us about a failed revolution. We have lost hope and faith in ourselves, and our ways of life have become so useless. And with the death and permanent absence of Chris Hani, it feels like you must take home this quote. I am saying, with the death and permanent absence of Chris, I quote, it feels like we have received a life sentence of poverty, hostility, criminalization, and waking up every day trying to figure out how we navigate the political, educational, and cultural, and social, and economic violence that is being heaped upon. When I'm talking about the criminalization, in particular, I refer to young people. That the very system of today, the post-apartheid social order, the post-apartheid economic order, it has criminalized them. And some of them we would refer to some of them as amaparapar. They have been criminalized by the system. They are the social and political outcasts. They are looked at as useless because you make them active. You are reminding us of the idea called Chris Hani. Be that as it may, Chris reminded us that the democratic gains must be protected by all means necessary, irrespective of the fact that we are being criminalized. He made a revolutionary call that a person at grassroots, I quote, that's Chris Hani, a person at grassroots must have a say. We must allow democratic organs of civil society, students, teachers, professionals, medium businesses to get involved in organizations so that society should be a watchdog against any deterioration in terms of democratic rule. That is from Chris Hani, an interview. Why I'm saying this, perhaps I need to support. You know, if you are looking at the post-apartheid civil society, it's like black men, you are on your own. That is the challenge that we are facing. Nobody cares whether you have an accommodation, and nobody cares whether you have NSFAS. Nobody cares whether you are organized within the society. And nobody cares because the moment they care of your revolutionary consciousness, that will be the opportunity of challenging them. If students, in particular students of University of Fort Hare, and professionals and ordinary people in the streets are forcibly made to have what I refer to Chris Hani amnesia, the next generation of South Africa and of the African continent will soon associate the name of Chris Hani with a failed revolution. A revolution that discarded democratic organs of civil society. A revolution that knocked down strong student movements. A revolution that clamped down courageous workers' unions. A revolution that discarded vigilant society. Because why? Nobody wants to be held accountable. As a result, the values and legacy of Chris Hani will always be associated with political entitlement, corruption, greed, and hypocrisy. And he knew very well that the revolutionary posture and character of any revolutionary changes, in particular when that those revolutionaries assume political power, hence on the eve of the democratic dispensation, Chris Hani vented out his fears and he said, I'm sure this quote was made earlier on, "What I fear, ANC members, about you, South Africans, about the youth of South Africa, is that the very liberators would emerge as elitists who drive, you were right, who drive Mercedes-Benzes and use the resources of this country to live in palaces and to gather riches. You were right, you were correct. And that is exactly what is happening today. You go around, Alice, you go around Mtata, you go around East London, they are all scrambling for the state resources and also plundering state resources. And by that, they're trying to forget about the work of Chris Hani. Chris Hani warned his own comrades against the seductions, what I call seductions of personal enrichment. He was sensitizing them against the focus from social struggle to a personal struggle, from community to individuals, from commitment to entitlement, from seeking collective transformation to seeking personal advancement. And that is true. And that is what is happening in South Africa today. People are seeking personal advancement. People are so trapped. They are so trapped into seductions of personal enrichment. Those are the pathologies of a post-apartheid South Africa. As a traveled revolutionary and having gained diverse international experiences and having studied the tendencies of the national liberation movements in the post-colonial period, and he knew that his own national liberation movement, that is our ANC, into the seductions of personal entitlement. I quote, "Today, the reality of national liberations as governments has given rise to widespread feelings of disappointment. This rises not only from the failure to live up to the expectations, rather is that national liberation movements as governments have come to be widely perceived as embodying alarming post-liberation pathologies. They have become authoritarians, so intolerant, careless, if not actively abusive of human rights, and ironically, often racists. Worse, they are also seen as having become corrupt, consumptionists, classists, and anti-developmental." That is the observation of Roger Southall. And that's exactly, if you observe what is happening in this country, that's exactly what this academic is advancing here. As I end, in the post-colonial and post-apartheid setting, there is a deliberate neglecting of our people by their own government. This sense of feeling neglected by our own leaders resulted to the deliberate criminalization of our people, in particular youth and women. Yusuf Shakur argued that being neglected produces neglected human beings. Being buried alive in poverty, decay, and blight begins to take root, and those who are oppressed become a product of their own oppressive environment. Hence, Chris Hani stated that he did not believe in just the freedom of national anthem. I quote, "I do not believe in just a freedom of national anthem. I do not believe in just a freedom of flags. Freedom can only be meaningful if it begins to tackle the problems of our people who are poor and who live in squatter camps." That's what is happening today. And the only problem, when you don't speak truth to power, you will always be a slave of that particular system. Just 30 years after the brutal assassination of Chris Hani, and 29 years into our own collective freedom, our people do not own land, no means of production. We are still suffocated in RDP houses. We are still living in polarized society with rich and poor. It's like, black man, you are on your own. The wheel of change is taking longer than expected. Just after reflecting on these political, social, and economic challenges, Comrade Peko of PAC said, "I am disturbed by the poverty and inhuman conditions of squatting in which African people live. In South Africa, a 20-minute drive from the center of the city leads to Umkhukhu. Poverty, economic college challenges, homelessness, and unemployment. Meanwhile, the land is being sold to any foreigner who has money. The rich are becoming richer, while the indigenous population, people like yourselves, are becoming poorer and poorer. The landlessness and national dispossession of their country's minerals, wealth, and other resources keep them in iron chains of poverty and misery." And that is what is happening. After the death of Chris Hani, we are still chained. Whether you are within the university, you are still chained. Whether you go outside during your holidays, you are still chained. And if you are not taking action, borrowing from the ideas of Chris Hani, you will be perpetually chained. It is true. Hence, Comrade Chris Hani stated that freedom is meaningless if we don't bring about an end to the gross and vulgar disparities between the blacks and whites in this country and in the economic field. In a sense, Hani was advocating that there will be no peace and reconciliation if the majority, in particular black people, are in chains, poverty, and are still suffering. The freedom that he sacrificed his life for will not be realized if his own people are still subjected to fear, harassment, and no reconciliation without owning of land. Desmond Tutu once said or stated that reconciliation means that those who have been on the underside of history must see that there is a qualitative difference between repression and freedom. And for them, freedom translates into having a supply of clean water, having electricity, being able to live in decent homes, and have good job, to have access to healthcare and education. I mean, what's the point of having made this transition if the quality of life of these people is not enhanced and improved? If not, the vote is useless. Which simply means that you are always remembered. Mna kunye nawe, we are always remembered. In fact, we'll be remembered next year. And this? All right. I won't dwell on that. My comrade will dwell. The so-called leaders of our own people at local level, those who are called the councillors, Christianity as a revolutionary idea. There is no clean water, serious electricity interruptions, unsafe communities, escalating gender-based violence, substance abuse and alcohol abuse by students, in particular students of University of Fort Hare. I studied here, my basic degree. I met Chris Hani in person here at University of Fort Hare. I used to live at what is that, Jolobe? But we never had a situation where you want to get to the main gate on Sunday or Saturday morning. You know that image? Okay. That's what I'm saying. When I'm saying alcohol abuse by students, during the time of Chris Hani, the students didn't have time for that. They had time to discuss and to dissect revolutionary ideas. And silencing of dissenting voices are a symbolic sign of counter-revolutionary. The focus from a social struggle to a personal struggle, from community to individual, seeking personal advancement, has taken a center stage here in South Africa. Now, this is my point. Hani's stance against personal gratification was also bolstered by Thabo Mbeki. Mbeki's position was clear and was in line with the revolutionary thinking of Chris Hani. Mbeki was frustrated and angry with comrades who were not ashamed to dip their fingers into the cookie jar. Those who began to act as though our only task as a movement was to win elections, share among the cadres of the movement the benefits of office. Others have used the opportunity to assume public office as an opening for them to acquire wealth for themselves by corrupt means. And that's what Chris Hani and Thabo Mbeki called Migodoi. So problematic, frustrating the revolution and the works of Chris Hani. However, Chris Hani advised people of South Africa that, yes, today you are marching against the apartheid government, but in future, committed against the residences in the townships, suburbs, injustice committed against the environment. There must be a culture of marching because marches involved people. That's what Chris Hani said. We shouldn't be the apologists. We should not always apologize. We need to be active. We need to transform our universities. You know, if you are looking around this university and other universities in this land, the culture of developing critical thinking or critical thinkers is no more there. The researchers within the corridors of academic universities or the academic corridors, the culture that is there, most of the academics, they want to be A-rated researchers, which is about themselves, than producing a critical knowledge that would empower our society. If you are a researcher, then it simply means that the kind of knowledge that you produce, you are talking about decolonization, you are right. You can be an expert of decolonization. You are talking about issues of coloniality, you are right. You can be an expert of that. But the major question is that, how much of that knowledge is going to the curriculum? Here at University of Fort Hare, you have A-rated academics, best academics, but it is all about personal gratification than producing a knowledge that is going to change society. That's the kind of knowledge that we want, transformative and emancipative knowledge, so that you become responsible citizens following the footsteps of Chris Hani. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Boy. Very fired up, raising very burning, touching issues. I think we need to make sure we have a night vigil to reflect on these issues. But we want to call our last speaker. Dr. Kwezi Mabasa. He is an economic and policy lead at the Frederick Ebert Steffing, former senior researcher at MISTRA. He received his PhD in development sociology at the University of the Witwatersrand. And his PhD was focusing on a gender analysis of South African agrarian question. I want to hand over to you, sir. Thank you.
Program Director, the leadership of the student movement, leadership of CLEAR, colleagues, comrades, friends, Sanbonan. Amandla! Hey, it's our working class, hey, it's all right, just checking that everyone is still awake. I've entitled my presentation, Hani, South African Black Marxism and the Case for Democratic Socialism. Comrade Martin Thembisile Chris Hani's life history and death should be read within the broader context of South Africa's political history. He was assassinated during an important era in the early 1990s when society was experiencing a transition towards democratic political rule. There is contestation within the historical and political archive about the that culminated in the fatal shooting. And this historical injustice needs to be addressed to give the family, his close comrades, and society. There can be no meaningful collective and individual closure or reconciliation without truth. As the critical legal scholar Professor Tshepo Madlingozi explains, open quotation marks, without truth, peace, justice, reconciliation is but a charade. It is true that in most post-transition places, there's been some semblance of peace. That is, there is no civil war or massive gross violations of human rights. However, we are talking about liberal peace here, close quotation marks. Chris Hani's life history and political legacy is often reduced to debates about his tragic death and the failures of what Madlingozi calls transitional justice in South Africa. Yet his contribution in our country's political history extends way beyond the 1990s democratic transition debates. It started in the mid-20th century as a student activist, MK trainee and subsequently commander, and a member of both the ANC and the South African Communist Party underground structures. In this seminar, I want to specifically focus on his contributions to what I have described or coined as a radical socialist tradition in South Africa. This contribution can be traced back to his secret participation in the Watershed SACP 1962 conference, which adopted the new program of action captured in the document entitled The Road to South African Freedom. This document described the major structural tenets of South Africa's racialized capitalist system succinctly, while outlining a vision for transitioning towards a democratic socialist society. Hani's contribution to the socialist tradition was equally exemplified when he held different political commissar deployments in the ANC MK camps and structures in Tanzania, Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia. Hugh Macmillan, the author of the 2014 biography, also narrates how Hani developed his socialist ideas further through international experiences such as training, exchanges with communist parties from other countries, and attending international conferences. More importantly, Hani and his comrades had the privilege of witnessing the successes and pitfalls of the 20th century socialist governments, especially in Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. They could learn and draw lessons from these countries while linking them to the South African social structure. This appreciation for the connection between socialist theory and actual political praxis was captured in Joe Slovo's seminal paper entitled Has Socialism Failed? Slovo, like Hani, argued that socialism, and it was necessary to reclaim it from these perversions. They both rejected the narrow status authoritarian models which characterize most 20th century socialist societies, and the imperial nature of the Soviet Union that contradicted socialist political values. But they equally challenged the end of history thesis advanced by capitalist economy advocates. This was captured in Slovo's concluding remarks in this document that I've cited, when he says, open quotation marks, "We dare not underestimate the damage that has been brought to the cause of socialism by the distortions we have touched upon. We, however, continue to have complete faith that socialism represents the most rational, just, and democratic way for human beings to relate to one another." Chris Hani expressed similar views in several interviews discussing 20th century socialism. He was unequivocal about emphasizing the need for renewed democratic socialist practices, which permeated different institutions in society, especially political and economic structures. Hani was quoted in interviews speaking about, and it is a direct quote, born again socialists and communists committed to political pluralism and multi-party political systems. There are four main lessons that can be gleaned or drawn from Hani's contribution to the South African socialist tradition. Firstly, a transformative notion of democracy, what I have termed as a market-led democracy in South Africa. The country is ranked highly in several international comparative indexes on democracy and civil liberties, such as the Freedom House and the Ibrahim Index of Good Governance. Yet South Africa performs poorly in essential socio-economic and human development indicators. High levels of socio-economic exclusion, poverty, and inequality and uneven spatial development characterize post-1994 South Africa. And these are underpinned by the triple challenges of race, class, and gender. Hani emphasized that democratizing the economy through different social ownership patterns, extending social redistribution, protecting labor rights, and other forms of redress was as salient as protecting political civil liberties. Several experiences from across the globe and internal SACP debates inspired Hani's deeper notion of democracy. This included social democratic models implemented in countries such as Sweden. I'm not suggesting that Comrade Chris Hani was a social democrat, but rather illuminating that democratic control over the economy was central in his political thinking. He explained this in a 1993 interview using the following words: "I think that the ANC will have to fight a new enemy. The enemy would be a struggle to make democracy and freedom worthwhile to ordinary South Africans. Our biggest enemy would be what do we do in the field of socio-economic restructuring?" The second lesson is related to what I call the black Marxist or socialist tradition in South Africa. This point, and I'm contesting the archive here, this point is marginalized and overlooked in most accounts of Chris Hani's life. He is mainly depicted or described as a revolutionary MK commander who primarily focused on traditional military concerns. Yet, the historical archive contradicts this proposition in several ways. Hani always emphasized political education and theory as cardinal pillars of struggle. In fact, he stated that military action must always be underpinned by rigorous political education. And he challenged any attempts to subordinate strategic questions to narrow militaristic goals. This observation is essential for challenging dominant socialist historiography, which often depicts black Marxist leaders as political or military actors only, without fully acknowledging their intellectual contribution to developing the socialist tradition in South Africa. So what I'm contesting here is the depiction of Hani as just a ruthless MK leader and commander who was against the negotiations. But I'm arguing that he is one of the key black socialist thinkers that actually made the Communist Party rethink its model. There are several examples in this archive that elucidate this contribution that I'm talking about. Moses Kotane's Craddock letter, where he cautions against Eurocentrism in the South African socialist movement, is important. He called for the party to become more Africanized, and he said the Communist Party of South Africa at that time must pay special attention to South Africa, study the conditions in the country, and concretize the demands of the toiling masses from first-hand information, that we must speak the language of the native masses and must know their demands. Similarly, the activist academic scholar Professor Bernard Makubane warned Marxists in South Africa from an abstract class analysis because it liquidates the national questions and ignores the crucial differences in the exploitation of black and white workers, which are due specifically to racism. Govan Beki's work on the peasants' revolts equally challenged the Communist Party's class analysis and political agency in several ways. It encouraged the party to appreciate how colonialism structured racial capitalism and class formation in ways that are different from the European experiences. Govan Beki and Moses Kotane's contributions should be highlighted, as they encouraged the South African Communist Party to look beyond the class schema provided in orthodox Marxist literature and analysis. Other black socialist thinkers, such as Mzala Nxumalo and Neville Alexander, also contributed to developing socialist thinking in South Africa. In summary, what I'm trying to argue here, and the second point, is that Chris Hani forms part of the strata of black radical Marxists who reshaped socialist thinking in South Africa and abroad. The third contribution from Chris Hani's life history and political legacy is his commitment to building mass-based working class struggles, which were led by alliances of unions, civil society organizations, religious groups, youth formations, and political parties. His clandestine work with several politically oriented civil society formations in the 1960s 1970s and 80s is well documented in the archive. He was equally influenced by what he had observed internationally in other liberation struggles, especially in countries like Vietnam, which emphasized popular legitimacy and support. This was markedly different from the orthodox social vanguardism, which presents communist parties as the sole bearers of the highest form of revolutionary knowledge, political theory, and emancipatory ideology. And hence, it explains why the SACP membership grew exponentially under Chris Hani's leadership in the 1990s. Hugh Macmillan notes that this trend was an outlier as most communist parties around the world were losing membership and legitimacy. Hani's emphasis on building a broad left front is essential for our contemporary political debates. South Africa is a society experiencing what I call is a polycrisis, which in my view is attributed to two systemic structural failures: a market-led neoliberal democracy and delegitimized state institutions. We are experiencing the impacts of economic and social policy shortcomings that limit efforts at democratizing the country's economy to address the past and present socio-economic injustices, as alluded to by Chris Hani. These policy directives place primacy on market-led development models, which elevate labor market flexibility, lessening financial exchange controls, privatization, and decreasing welfare support as core measures for sustained economic development. There are policy choices based on the prescripts of dominant international financial institutions, and they continue to fail South Africans. We need an alternative human rights-centered economic and social policy framework, highlighting the need for transitioning beyond a market-led democracy. And this is a call to the left to exercise to this challenge. However, the left political organizations in this country have not analyzed or responded to this polycrisis properly. And this raises a call for renewing left organizational politics and leadership throughout the country, which is what I call the fourth lesson. Comrade Chris Hani was one of the leading thinkers on how to renew left politics and leadership in order to strengthen the liberation movement. The idea of renewal that is now famous actually can be traced back to his writings and his advocacy. He even extended this contribution to leadership questions in the post-apartheid era. Historically, this political legacy can be traced back to the fierce internal democracy and organizational renewal advocacy he led in the ANC and SACP during the 20th century. The content of the Hani Memorandum and the lack of strategic reflections on the Wankie campaigns illuminate this point. The demands in both cases spoke about the following essential pillars of renewing left politics in the movement: a critical analysis of the class divisions within the members of the movement, corruption, abuse of political office and authority, membership control, responsible leadership, and delinking political strategy from working class needs. This appetite for self-reflection and criticism was echoed by Chris Hani throughout his reflections on the new government during interviews. He repeatedly warned the ANC-led alliance against becoming a duplicate of the apartheid state. And he repeatedly warned against the co-option of elites into what I have termed a market-led democracy. So in other words, Comrade Chris Hani was not afraid to rethink and reconceptualize left ideology or political practice so that it does not become socially obsolete. And in conclusion, Program Director, I think the challenge that I draw from his legacy is how do we rebuild the left and a popular left front to achieve liberation? Because we have achieved democracy, but we have not achieved liberation. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I think that last thought, very powerful. We have achieved we have supposedly achieved democracy. I'm sorry to add that word there. But we have not achieved liberation. Thanks for that. I think we've had enough time to reflect for today, and really thanks to all our guests who have really taken their time to come to this place. I'm sure they've got many commitments that are very important, you know. But we really want to thank in a very important way the Hani family. For them, this is not just a hero, but it's a loss that they're living with. But for them to take time to share with us that experience and that person that they've lost is really a humbling experience. Ubuntu, siyabonga kakhulu. I want to challenge Ubaba to say that I will be his student. I beg of him to guide me. His knowledge on African and Southern African history is really profound. Thanks a lot for that. And also all our speakers, want to thank them. The nuggets and the insights that they've shared have really opened our minds and really put us in a path to think critically about our hero, Hani. But also I think the challenge that remains is that if we have this great hero who has now rested, what are we going to do about that? Because we all seem to agree that the problems that he was facing are now worse. It seems that there's a call here. You know, in the Christian tradition, we're asked to follow Jesus. But I think the message I'm getting is that here are these crises they're facing us. Where are these incorruptible people? Where are these people who are willing to fight for a world that is fair and equal? I think that's a call that I'm taking from this. The world is still a mess. It needs more Hanis. People will stand up and fight for something. Don't have to fight for everything. Just fight for something. Be committed to something. We talk about gender-based violence. We're talking about market-led democracies. We talk about corruption. All of those problems confront us today. A little bit of character would add something to that. So I think as we close, I want to leave you with those thoughts. Have a lovely Friday and weekend. Thank you. Up if you want to engage. Look, how many people have questions? Can we raise hands so to identify those and open for those? Those who have questions, I'm sorry about that. I think it's only fair that we open a space for questions. I want to see the hands of those who have questions. I don't want questions from the questions. I want original question. I'm noting 1, 2, 3. There's comments. There's a comment, right? So we'll start with the comment. We'll start with a comment, and then we're going to take the questions in that order. Let's try to keep them very short. I know there's a lot you want to share, but keep it to the point.
Good day, everyone. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Honestly, I thank God for all the speakers. I really learned a lot from what Dr. Boy said regarding the history of Hani. I'm a foreigner. I've not heard about that Hani. In fact, I saw him on television when they were paying tribute to him at 30 years. I think just captured my fancy. So someone now told me that they're going to have a program to return to come. So I really learned something about the history of Hani. And the question our brother raised on the South Africans has gotten their democracy, but the question is, are they liberated? Are we liberated? So it also boils down to all African countries. Most of us are still in chain, as what our doctor said. But we pray that God Almighty will give us the power to get liberated. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. So we'll take the questions in that order, and then we'll allow for answers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is...
Did you tell us your name?
No.
You can just tell us your name.
Yeah, my name is Glory.
Gloria.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Luando. Mine is not necessarily a question, rather, but I needed to be mischievous because I didn't know that the MC was going to take comments. I'm just about to throw some comments on the presentations and also on the nature and form of who Chris was and the idea that he had about the emancipation of this country. Chris was this great revolutionary that all of us must learn from. Chris was one amongst others who challenged leaders of the ANC to say, you have veered off the nature and form of the democratic movement, which then led to a 1969, what we call Morogoro Conference, which resolved on what day in the ANC that is called strategies and tactics of the ANC. So Chris was this brave, as young people that must learn from. What then could be the solution that was challenged with the triple crisis that even the list is long now? We have poverty, unemployment, inequality, we have load shedding, we have so many of them. What therefore becomes the responsibility? I think, one, universities, which are supposed to be the hub and fountains of knowledge based on research, have become reactionary, as Dr. Boyce have become reactionary in producing knowledge because they have in this sense of individualizing their work. So it means that we must challenge universities not to be reactionary, but to be progressive in a way that will benefit the nation, in the way that it will benefit the globe. South Africa today forms part of BRICS. We see that BRICS is gaining more momentum and power. Many countries across the globe join BRICS. Chris would have loved that because if BRICS becomes a success in the world, South Africa will be on the table and be part of decision makers. So I think we must take lessons from Chris Hani. We must challenge universities. These symposiums and lectures should not be once off. They should be annual activities that we engage on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Usiamtanda Ngutwana. I'm the institutional projects and inter. I'm a final year political science student. Mine, before I greet everyone, there's a favorite song, in fact, a song that touches me that says, Bambulele kanjani uthonyani, bamzumile siyabazonda. I think before coming to the institution, which is the University of Fort Hare, my goal and wish was to come here and be a leader and agent, because this is the university that we know as an heritage and a very good university that has produced a lot of leaders. We must thank the presentations that were made by the speakers. We learned a lot. As young leaders, I unlearned a lot of things and learned a lot of things about the same iconic leader, which was Chris Hani. But the question that is, and everyone has been posing, is that yes, each and every generation, I think as Speaker Nelson Mandela says that each and every generation must discover its mission and drive towards that mission. As young people now in our days, I don't want to add on the critiques that people have been saying about the ANC, but gone are the days where, as young activists, student activists, we are getting political education. Gone are those days where our old veteran leaders would come and engage us in such symposiums, get more insight and fruitful education in ideologies of our political struggle and our liberational movement. Now we are inducted in politics of corruption, politics of who must we vote for, because that's what Nelson Thabo Mbeki says, that nowadays we have politicians that says Ndiketheni. It's no longer the days that where people of organization and the masses would decide that this is the leader we want. So our political posture and the political system on its own has taken a leap and a sharp turn. And then as young activists, that we want to be, because we want to be seen and we want to be like Chris Hani. But how do you become that in a polluted political environment where if you say or open your word, your life will be taken as easy as that? So that's the question that I want to pose, to say that as young activists, we want to participate. We have the eager and the energy to participate. But here's this polluted environment with full of corruption, full of people who are murderers, people who are now teaching us politics about killing or removing the next person for you to be on top. How then do we discover ourselves as this huge generation? Thank you very much.
The last side? Oh.
No, good afternoon. My name is Liz Gongoba. I think to start off, thank you to the speakers and thank you to the program director for, I think, what was a very insightful afternoon. Mine is to be rather brief. I'll start off with what is most fresh in my mind, and I think to Dr. Mabasa's last point, this ethic or this drive towards revitalizing movements on the left. I think my question is to ask at which level and how ought we to do that in a way that speaks directly to power and in a way that is able to infiltrate those corridors of power? Are we talking about something that is institutional at the level of the university? Are we talking about something that mobilizes at the level of policy? Or are we talking about something that is speaking directly into the tripartite alliance? And in which way would, if we're honoring the memory of Utadu Chris Hani, would he have seen this and would he have envisaged this in the 21st century?
Thank you. I think we've got those two pressing questions. You'll take the last question. You'll take the last question. You want to also throw something there? To one. Some of our speakers, anyone? Are you okay? Okay. Okay. I think, yeah. So let's start with the last one.
Yeah, but can I just, oh, sorry. Can I just start the last one, but I want to get general comments, eh?
No, feel free.
No, feel free, okay. So I think one of the things we have to do, and I alluded to it in the presentation, was, you see, Comrade Chris Hani was, and I said it, he was not afraid to engage in self-criticism, and not just at the personal level, even organizationally. And as we know, with the subsequent events after the memorandum, it nearly led to his death. So we've got to be able to really engage in the question of renewing our organizations, not just political parties, even the student movement, religious organizations, because those organizations are political in themselves. So the deterioration of politics reflects the deterioration in those organizations. I mean, it can't be that SRC is also caught with its hand in the cookie jar. There are cases where SATU is selling jobs. It can't be. It cannot be. So that's the point I'm making. The second point, on this question around the left, what I'm arguing is that the left needs to rethink how it approaches organizing. This idea that you have a few comrades of the Communist Party who are going to meet in somewhere in a cell and then tell people that this is the ideology of Karl Marx and Lenin is not going to work. Identify a minimum program around key policy issues, whether it's the basic income grant, the minimum wage, land, and organize around that minimum program. The second thing, we must also be willing to work with organizations that we wouldn't traditionally work with. Because now people are organizing outside of what we classically conceived as the left and political parties. So in other words, what I'm trying to argue is that there are churches, there are youth movements that you wouldn't classify as political necessarily, but they're engaging in left politics. That's the second thing. And then the third point is also, let's not be afraid to lose anything in terms of criticizing our own movement as the youth. Even if it means not leading at a particular time. Because my apprehension is that the youth is being co-opted because the youth wants to lead at all costs. Sometimes we need to draw from Chris Hani's legacy that you actually need to be marginalized, like when they were expelled and they were getting classes from Jack and Race, from Jack Simmons in his home. But they never gave up politics. So in other words, don't be afraid to be honest and let go of some privileges. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was very touched when you said the political environment is poisoned. You want to do something, but you want to do something honestly and you want to denounce corruption. Next thing, there is a hit on you. And I don't know what Chris Hani would do in these circumstances, but I know people who are a bit on that level, who also came back and who were not after the hunt for power and the hunt for wealth, and they got jobs in the state. They tried to run, doing something good in transport, in public transport. They tried to run a clinic. It's not sexy. It's not sexy. Or even working in the tax office. That's not sexy. But that is what makes a developmental state. Running around with slogans and being power and trying to make the masses powerful and dislodge bad leaders, yes, that has its place, it's very important. If you don't get access to the state, then you can't work in the state. So I'm not diminishing that, that is also important. But what we need in the state is people who know to do things. Because if you get appointed because somebody is your friend or your godfather, or you paid something, or they paid you, and you have to run buses. What are you going to do? How are you going to run buses? You don't know how to run buses. I'm thinking of what Temba said about how Chris Hani engineered. Was it just Chris Hani's father? The escape, getting people to meet at a certain point, getting the transport ready, knowing what to do at the border, having the people in the other country. It's not running buses, but it's almost like that. It's not running a clinic, but it comes close because you actually do stuff. So I would say, go and do stuff, learn how to do stuff. Reading books and political ideology, yes, that is what you do, you're academics. But in your free time, do stuff. Work in a church, work in a youth organization, work in the community, distribute condoms, whatever. Learn how to do stuff, because we are now led by people who do not know how to do anything. Yeah.
Wow. So no one is coming to teach you. But the world is open. There's so many opportunities to learn. So thanks, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the final words from our colleagues and the questions. Have a lovely one.